Some people are just built different, and I mean that literally. Anatomists have long known that you never quite know what you're going to find during human dissection. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's pretty exciting to find something unexpected. And the reason this happens at all is because human beings, like all other biological organisms, are subject to variation within our species. Nature is constantly experimenting to see if subtle variations will equate to greater reproductive or environmental success. And in today's video, with the help of the cadavers here in the lab, we're going to take a look at a few different musculoskeletal variations and see if they can actually make someone better equipped at certain activities, including athletic performance. It's going to be an unusual one. Let's do this. Take a moment and ask yourself, what is normal? How do we arrive at the conclusion that something is just as we expect it to be or not at all like we expect it to be? Now, this question isn't unique to anatomists by any means, but it's something anatomists have struggled with for a very long time. When you dissect enough human beings, you're going to find all sorts of blood vessels, nerves, muscles, and even organs doing some pretty unexpected things. Maybe they take a different pathway than you're used to, or maybe they're just in a completely different position than you anticipate, such as in situs inversus, which is where the internal organs of the body are completely reversed. The heart projects to the right, the liver's on the left, the stomach's on the right, everything's backwards yet still functional. And look, I get it, situs inversus is extremely rare, but I think you get the point here. Oftentimes there's a really fine line between normal and abnormal. What could be considered normal for one population might be considered abnormal in a completely separate population. An easy example would be height. The average height for males in the United States is 1.77 meters or 5'9", while the average height for a male in India is 1.66 meters or 5'5". Now, it's not as though one is normal and the other isn't. This is just a very obvious example of variation within the species. But let's focus on some less obvious ones. But real quick, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Yoga Body Teachers College. When this lab first opened, we exclusively taught in-person labs to a variety of students: EMTs, paramedics, medical assistants, massage therapists, and even those going through yoga teaching certification programs. And I remember being very surprised at just how much yoga teachers actually know about the human body, which is one reason I'm so impressed with Yoga Body Teachers College. They specialize in science-based online certification programs for yoga teachers, yoga breathing coaches, yoga trapeze teachers, and stretching coaches. If you're interested in starting a new career or side job helping people improve their health, overcome injuries, manage stress, or just live their best lives longer, Yoga Body's courses might be right for you. They take a science-based, business-positive approach to yoga, helping turn passionate students into successful industry professionals. Since 2007, Yoga Body has certified over 23,000 teachers in 41 countries. They're backed by Yoga Alliance, American Council on Exercise, and even American Council on Education, making them one of the only schools in the entire world eligible for college credits. They prepared a free report for you called How to Choose a Yoga Teacher Training Program, and you can access it immediately at yogabody.com/IHA, or you can just click the link in the description below. Biceps brachii is perhaps the most famous muscle in the human body. Now, its name actually translates to two-headed muscle of the brachium, which is a really good name considering that's exactly what it does for most people. Typically, the long head of biceps brachii originates at the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, while the short head originates at the coracoid process of the scapula. Both heads will then insert at the radial tuberosity of the radius. However, multiple cadaver-based studies have shown that it can have anywhere between 3 and 7 heads, sometimes attaching in the same locations that the other two heads are attaching, or it can get creative and attach elsewhere on the humerus or scapula. Most often, a third head will arise between the long and the short heads and will attach near the insertion of another famous muscle called pectoralis major. Now, studies haven't really determined any usefulness for the supernumerary heads at this point, but that doesn't mean there isn't any usefulness. It just means studies really haven't tested it all that much. I mean, any additional heads means that you're going to have tension being transmitted differently throughout the muscle and throughout the skeletal attachments. In preparation for this video, I looked for examples of bodybuilders that had additional biceps heads, and honestly, I didn't really find anything, and it's possible that I just didn't really look hard enough, but given that the incidence rate is around 13% or less of the population actually has supernumerary biceps heads, it's not all that surprising that I didn't find anything. However, there's another variability within biceps brachii that is all over the place, and there's even a test that you can perform yourself, although the test is far from scientific. Look, muscles can be divided into what are known as muscle bellies and muscle tendons. Based on your genetics, you're gonna have a specific muscle to tendon ratio. For some, the muscle belly is long, giving the appearance of nice, full biceps brachii. But for others, the muscle belly is much shorter, making the muscle belly bulge more, giving it a characteristic peak. Now, bone length can also determine or help determine the appearance of your biceps, but the test you'll commonly see be performed by people is called the finger test. And what they'll do, so you'll bring your arm up, and I want you to know I have impressively unimpressive biceps, and also I'm wearing a sweatshirt here, but if you take a finger and what you try and do is you put it between your elbow and then the muscle belly. So you might be able to fit 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, and that will help you determine your muscle to tendon ratio. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter all that much what you have, because you can still grow the biceps regardless, but it definitely is going to affect its appearance. Another famous muscle called the rectus abdominis typically presents with 8 individual segments, which are created by 3 horizontally oriented tendinous intersections. The muscle originates on what's known as the pubic crest of the pubic bone, and then travels and inserts up at the xiphoid process of the sternum, as well as the costal cartilages of ribs 5, 6, and 7. When the muscle contracts, each of those individual segments will bulge. And then when you add that all together, you get a ratcheting effect, or more appropriately is that crunch appearance that we're all familiar with. However, some individuals can have up to 5 tendinous intersections, giving them 12 individual segments, or a 12-pack. A 10-pack, which is created by 4 tendinous intersections, is far more common than a 12-pack, but still very uncommon. It's possible that somewhere around 20% or so of the population has a 10-pack, while only 1 to 2% of the population has a 12-pack. Now, it's important to note that these percentages are extrapolations based on the available data, so please take them with a pretty big grain of salt. But you're probably wondering, does having these extra segments give you any kind of advantage over those who have less segments? And the answer is probably not. Don't get me wrong, it looks awesome for sure. And functionally, the increased segments might allow for some more precision during contraction, but the problem here is a limit in range of motion by the skeleton. You see, the ribs physically get in the way, and then the facet joints, which run up and down your vertebral column, they define the allowed range of motion throughout your entire vertebral column. So it's not as though just because you added more segments, you can bypass the skeletal limitations. However, if you're a bodybuilder, then it most definitely comes with an advantage because, again, it just looks awesome. I could actually continue to give example after example of variability within specific muscles, but instead, I now want to focus on variability in how skeletal muscle actually attaches to the physical skeleton. For the nerds out there, this is going to be a real treat because we're about to get into the weeds, but it is very, very cool. You see, the real name for muscle attachment sites is enthesis. And there are 2 different types of entheses. You have a fibrous enthesis and a fibrocartilaginous enthesis. You see, muscles are completely enveloped in connective tissue. It surrounds every single muscle cell, groups of cells, and even the entirety of the muscle itself. A tendon is simply a continuation of that connective tissue, except now the collagen proteins are all going in one single direction. Now, as that tendon approaches and begins to merge with the bone itself, this is where the differences between a fibrous and a fibrocartilaginous enthesis emerges. Fibrous entheses are relatively straightforward. The collagen from the tendons will blend with the periosteum of a bone. Periosteum is that connective tissue outer wrapping of a bone, and depending on the muscle, the collagen from the tendon may actually penetrate deeper into the dense compact bone underneath. A fibrocartilaginous enthesis, on the other hand, it does something very similar, but instead, as it's approaching the periosteum, the collagen will start to transition into cartilage cells. And then again, it can continue going into the periosteum and the compact bone. But because there's cartilage, that's going to affect how energy is transmitted between the tissues. Most studies have been focused on the fibrocartilaginous entheses because honestly, that's just the most common type of enthesis in the body. In the field of osteoarchaeology, scientists are in a constant pursuit to understand the shape and size of an enthesis and how that may relate to the physical activity in someone's lifetime. Bones are capable of reshaping themselves based around activity. In fact, Jonathan did an entire video already on how exercise can shape your bones, so be sure to check that out after this video. But I want you to picture this. Let's say a forensic anthropologist is called in to identify or investigate skeletal remains that are found in a forest. If they were able to look at the shape, size, and location of these entheses and then infer, it was a construction worker, played piano, so on and so forth, that would dramatically speed up the investigative process. It's also useful in helping to determine the physical lifestyle of our human ancestors such as Homo naledi or Homo heidelbergensis and plenty of others. Although there are other factors that go into determining the shape and size of these entheses such as age and sex. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as just to say, oh, it's shaped and sized like this because of physical activity. It's complex. But now that we understand that nature is constantly experimenting through the evolutionary process, let me ask you another question. Do you think there may be some value in shifting the location of an enthesis in order to create a difference in leverage? The answer is yes. Not only are muscle shapes and sizes variable, but the location with which they attach on the skeleton can also vary. Now, I don't want to make it seem as though, the translocation of this enthesis is going to be huge. I mean, you don't want muscles just attaching everywhere willy-nilly. That would be very bad. Instead, the enthesis might have just shifted a couple millimeters or less to some different location on the same bone. But that small shift can have very large consequences in regards to leverage. It's entirely possible that a muscle or two or more in your body are attaching in a slightly different location than what we teach in the textbooks, making you slightly faster or stronger depending on the muscle and the available range of motion, so on and so forth. How much faster? How much stronger? I couldn't tell you, right? We would need to take the measurements and then do the math to figure it out. But this is the struggle when it comes to determining what is anatomically normal. It's not as though the textbooks are wrong or anatomy is just wildly inconsistent. In fact, anatomists are able to determine what is considered normal based around repeated observations. Traits within populations can and do shift over time. That's just the evolutionary process. But this is why anatomists typically favor a range of normality as opposed to a strict and unwavering normality. But from a teaching standpoint, that would just be brutally difficult to do in an intro to anatomy course. Can you imagine sitting in the classroom and your instructor says, for the most part, after everything they teach, it would be the most confusing class in the world. Intro anatomy courses are teaching students the structures and processes that have been observed the most over hundreds of years of rigorous study. I have no problem saying that it's normal for a human to have 2 arms, 2 legs, a brain, a liver, an epidermis, or biceps brachii that originates at the supraglenoid tubercle, the coracoid process, and inserts at the radial tuberosity. Just because there may be a range of normality doesn't mean that it's unreasonable to expect things to be structured a certain way most of the time. Personally though, what I find to be the most interesting are the edge cases in the bell curve of normality. Look, we're not finding any new structures in the human body. In the event that you see a headline that says, anatomists discover new structure, they probably didn't. Anatomists have likely known about that for quite some time. The problem just came down to likely classification as well as determining its exact function. Instead though, we are still finding new variable tissues and structures in the body and trying to figure out how that relates to the body's overall function. I would not be surprised if many of the best athletes in the world have variabilities that are either bordering or simply outside of the range of normal, and it positively affects their performance in ways that you just cannot train for, right? If I just dropped everything and decided to become an elite swimmer, that doesn't mean I can do it, at least at a highly competitive fashion, right? Bodies are different, people are different, and it's not to say that athletes don't work extremely hard because they do. It's just saying If we really started looking into the nuances of these things, it wouldn't be surprising if we're finding, oh, look, Michael Phelps had a muscle attached in a slightly different position or something along those lines. In fact, to me, this is just really interesting about the human body, because what it shows us is that really, truly, quite literally, some people are just built different. Thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to click the link in the description below and get your free report from Yoga Body Teachers College today. As always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you in the next video.